In the last video, we created this schema for the CRM system. Now we need to create the place for this data to live. So let's create a new class inside of the classes folder. If we take a look at one of these other classes, like say the jump drive, we can see that it's importing system from the generic folder and extending system to automatically give us everything that we might need for a system, like power distribution and damage control. So let's do that really quick. We'll import system from the generic folder, and then we will create our CRM class, and that's going to extend the system class. In our constructor, we need to make sure that we override different properties that Thorium requires in order for the class to properly work. If we take a look at our jump drive, since we're extending, we have to call super before messing around with anything else. For Thorium to work, it has to have a class and type property on the class, and that's going to be exactly the same as the name of the class itself. Also, it's good to override the name and display name property so that it actually is something sensible or something that matches the system better. That's actually all that we need to override. In the jump drive's case, it's overriding the power because the jump drive has some unique power requirements. If we wanted to do that here for the CRM, we could, but we're not going to worry about that, so we can get rid of the jump drive now. What will be helpful, though, to look at is our schema, because the schema has all of the different properties that are going to be necessary for our system to work. All of these things up here are provided by the system itself already, so we don't have to worry about those, but password, activated, fighters, and enemies we do have to worry about. So let's add those. Anytime that we are putting in data that's not static, we need to make sure that we reference the params property that's passed in. That way, if we're loading Thorium from a snapshot, it will have that data already available and it'll put that into the system for us. It's also good to include some good defaults. So a good default password is blank so that they have the ability to reset it, and a good activated state is false because it's not going to be activated. I'm going to skip fighters and enemies for right now. Until we get to that, I'm just going to add this .fighters equals empty array. Now we can add some methods to handle the CRM system, to change it around. For example, we'll want to change the password, and all that these methods are going to do is just update the class itself. So they'll probably be fairly simple in most cases. We also might want to add some overrides to our existing methods for the system. For example, if the power is removed or if the system becomes damaged, we should deactivate it. We can take a look at the engine system, for example, to see how this is done. All that it does is just overrides the break method, and then down here it's going to call super.break with the three properties or three parameters that it passes. So I'll just copy that over here, and anytime that this breaks, we'll just set this .activated to false. We can do the same thing with power. The only thing that's passed to set power, which is the system method, is power level. So here I've set it so that if we have power in the system, and if its lowest power level is greater than the power level that they set it to, which means the power level is below the minimum required power level, then we just set the activated state to false. And then, of course, pass that on to the system so it can handle it properly. Let's add a class for our CRM fighter. We'll probably want to create this as a class just to make sure that everything about it, including its behavior, is encapsulated. We'll create that above the CRM class itself. The constructor for this is going to be very similar to the CRM class itself. We'll just want to make sure that it instantiates it properly with all of the properties that it already has, or use some meaningful defaults. To make this easier, I'm just going to copy all of these properties here and paste them in, and add a this to the front equals params dot, and then paste it in again, and then add an or, and then we can add the meaningful defaults to all of these. So for example, the ID needs to be generated, and I can use the UUID package to do that. Now that we have all of this in place, let's instantiate it for any fighters and enemies that already existed in our snapshot. So we'll have params.fighters, and hopefully that's set to a thing. Just to make sure that it is, we'll say if this, and if it is an array, it'll have the length property, and if the length property is greater than 0, then we will loop over all of them and put it into this array. And we want to put it in with that class that we created up here. And we can copy this here, but instead of fighters, we'll do enemies. Let's add a couple of helper methods to the CRM class, just for our convenience. One of the things that's going to be helpful is the statistics. So the total number of fighters and how many have been destroyed, and the total number of targets and how many have been destroyed. So let's create getters for these 4 properties. And to do a getter, we just put get in front of a function, and then that function has to return a value. And we'll return this .fighters.length. And then we can do the same thing for enemy count. We'll add another getter for fighter destroyed count, and this will return a filtered list where any fighters that are destroyed will remain in the list, and we'll return the length of that, and then we can do the same thing for enemies. Awesome. We won't be able to get at these unless we update our schema, so let's do that really quick. These are going to be integers, so I'll just copy all of these, put them into my schema for the CRM, and then we can add the type. That's how we can add a helper method to our class and have that be accessible directly from the schema. We'll probably be adding additional methods to the CRM fighter class and to the CRM system itself, but this looks good so far. We need to make sure that it gets consumed by the rest of Thorium, and that's done by importing it from this index.js file here. So we do that by just writing export default as CRM. The name of the class here is important, from, and then the file that it's in, CRM. And now it should be usable by the rest of Thorium. In the next video, we'll talk about adding mutations and events.